It's Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021, 6 p.m. This workshop of the Board of Commissioners is called to order. City Clerk, will you call the roll?
Mayor Hendricks.
Here.
Vice Mayor Price.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Andrews.
Here.
Commissioner Hudson.
Here.
First is public comment. If you have any public comment, step to the podium, state your name and address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Topics for discussion. First is 4th of July fireworks discussion. Director Hatch.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. So based on reading this, it's been a while since I've gotten an angry email, so I figured I'd throw this out there for discussion. So we're looking at, as you can see, we currently sit without a contract for 4th of July fireworks, so our intent is to put on an RFP. We did have some discussions during the budget hearings about cost savings, all that stuff. So we put together this idea just to explore, see what it looks like. I figured I'd explain it to everybody. It seems self-explanatory, but I'll just see if you guys have any questions. Right now, we do fireworks on 4th of July. So within the RFP, the goal is to get a bid for 4th of July with a barge, 4th of July without a barge. And our discussions with other cities, they do put it in the hands of the fireworks companies to get the barge. We tried to do it ourselves. I could sit here for hours and talk about the history, the known and unknown of barges in Madeira Beach, but the secondary option that we were considering putting in the RFP, if I have the blessing here, is to look at an alternative date near 4th of July. The reason I say this, and obviously unpatriotic is not the number one reason. That's not what we're looking. We're still doing it, still looking to host the fireworks, still celebrating 4th of July, Independence Day. And if you say Independence Day, people might forget that's 4th. Anyway, so there's a couple of options that we were considering. And I'll kind of get into why. So within our current handbook, we pay out overtime on the day that the 4th of July is observed. So if the 4th of July is observed on a Monday and the 4th of July is Monday, we get overtime for that for anybody else to work. If the 4th of July is a Saturday and we have fireworks on that Saturday, there's no overtime. It's just a normal Saturday. We get paid for whatever. If it's a Saturday, we get paid for the Friday before the 3rd. It's observed on the 3rd. That's one potential cost-saving measure if we were to do it on the weekends. Additionally, there's a lot of other responsibilities staff have on the 4th of July, whether it's sanitation or public works or my staff or anybody else. This would allow us to do fireworks on a day that's not the 4th of July and still be able to focus on those things either on a less amount of time or just not be distracted by additional responsibilities. On top of that, having it on, and I'm just listing here, but Saturday or Sunday next year in 2022. That provides us on a non-popular day for fireworks. Everybody's doing fireworks on the 4th of July, so the demand is there. The early discussions we've had at the conference previously was that if we had it on the 2nd or 3rd, that the price could potentially go down. So there's more availability for crews to work those days and less demand for the fireworks and the crews than there would be on the 4th of July, as well as with the barge. There's a very good potential. More recently, the city of St. Pete Beach had a barge for 4th of July. We asked the same company for one, and it was almost $10,000 or $15,000 more because they had to go find another one. My anticipation is we could call them or another city utilizing it and say, we'll use it Saturday, you guys use it Sunday, or whatever, how it works out, and we can split the cost. So it's another potential cost-saving measure. Again, nothing set in stone, just options. We want to explore it and make sure that there is a possibility to do that. But most importantly, I don't want to do it if people are going to be over at the rec center complaining. And, if we just say, hey, everything works on the 4th of July, we're happy with what we're spending, this and that, we'll go forth with that. But I at least wanted to present options for the 4th of July and then potential saving measures on alternative dates. So just creative thinking, not looking to upset anybody. But I know we did, Commissioner Andrews can probably speak on this, we did the 3rd 5 years ago, and we got a few angry phone calls. But we got to kind of look at the balance here and see. But
Yeah.
so just open it up for questions if you guys are interested.
Barge-wise, maybe we can tie a bunch of those derelict boats together, and
We would definitely get our show.
and that can be a part of the fireworks display. How about the school, Jay? I mean, hasn't that been working out okay for us?
It has. The school's perfect for every reason except for the largest American Legion in the United States is directly across behind the Holiday Inn. So we've taken, and I know we've done the show differently in the last 20 years, probably in 15 different places, but it's unfortunate. It's one of the considerations. I feel like on a barge out here, everybody can see it. Over on that property, it eliminates them. And we get a lot of phone calls from, I forget, the sea towers, from those folks too, that think they live in Madeira, but they would really like it back too. So I've got them looking for barges as well. But yeah, the school is always an option. Schools will go. That's an easy consideration. So that's when I say non-barge, it has to be at the school.
Yeah.
Because we don't have enough land to do it really anywhere else. So.
Jay, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Several years ago, we did the 4th of July facility, and like I said, several years ago, down in Johns Pass. And we did it with Treasure Island. Is there any advantage to moving it to a different location, or would you rather prefer to keep it up here?
That's a potential discussion as well. We have a pretty good relationship with the folks in the rec department over there. So, I mean, that's
They normally get the barge, or, whatever. We could always split the barge if that was necessary.
Right.
But I didn't know if it was specifically that you wanted it right here, so I was just curious.
Yeah, I mean, as the rec director, I'm kind of fond of this location, but
Okay. No problem.
John's Pass, that's another option. And again, this is, like I said, this is just an RFP, so we can explore our options for solo, and I can have a discussion with Treasure Island as well, just to see. I know it's been discussed, and with all the businesses there and everything else, I feel like there'd be some financial support naturally. But again,
Yeah. I wonder if the folks that own the Holton property now would let us do it from there. That would move it out to where they could see it from the American Legion and these
that's
other
gonna
condos.
Not to put him on the spot, but that's going to be a question for our fire chief as far as fallout zone. And I know that it all depends on the size of the shell.
Yeah.
The barge gives us the largest shell. The school gives us, we cut it very close. I'm glad the fire chief was over here because one of the shells, I think, hit their truck. But then there's also, that property's a little bit smaller. It puts us very close to the bridge, and that makes us nervous.
Okay.
But, I mean, again, we're going to continue to look at every option, but, yeah.
Yeah. I've got no problem with it being on the 2nd. Maybe that's something we need to look at as far as, it's the Saturday closest to the 4th of July. Just as a general guideline, I don't know.
Yeah, and in the research, 4th of July does not fall on a weekend until 2026. So we've got 4 more years, potentially. And if we did the Saturday nearest, the only concern I would have is 2024 Saturdays it's after 4th of July, but the first Saturdays after 4th of July, yes. And then this is the last thing I forgot to mention is we did an event a couple years back that we don't really like to talk about because it wasn't necessarily successful because, again, everybody's doing 4th of July fireworks. Yeah. But if we were on a Saturday the 2nd and we actually put a band out there and spent a little money on a beer truck or whatever, food and that stuff, I think we'd be able to recoup some of that revenue as well. So, and that's where we're going. It's going to be more work for us to try to do that, to recoup those things, but it makes us the only game in town outside of the Clearwater Threshers, who do fireworks, I think, every night in July or something. But I just want to make sure that we're not ruining anybody's. I think the big thing about it is I think we all want to throw a party on the 4th of July. And based on what I saw this year, there's plenty of fireworks in Madeira on the 4th of July. So, anyway.
Well, hello, Jay. Okay, look, I love the outside-the-box thinking. I think this is really cool. And I will tell you from what I've always learned from the business community here, they don't care if there's fireworks on them. You might get a couple people that'll push back on it, but as we like to put it, we don't have any problems getting fannies in the seats on 4th of July. The beach is packed, and it'll be packed whether we host fireworks at night or not. There may be some residents, and I would like to kind of conduct some kind of maybe online poll to see what was going on here. And I think, honestly, if we wanted to step outside of this even further and just say, you know what, let's do it Memorial Day weekend. I mean, you know, especially if we're catering to the veterans, and this area is packed full of veterans, and we've shown our commitment as a board and as a city over the years. Man, that would definitely be the only game in town. Then you could really host an event out there and throw a fireworks display that would blow everybody away, and I'm sure it'll be more price prohibitive. But again, this all kind of hinges on the fact of whether or not the citizenry would be okay with moving it. But you're 1,000% correct. Whether we host fireworks or not, our fireworks, they're great. But if you look to the left or you look to the right or you look on the beach, you're going to see pretty similar shows just about anywhere. I mean, we've got individuals that are throwing $50,000 fireworks displays in their backyards. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's not the point. But if we're really looking to step outside the box and look for something different, and I threw Memorial Day out there only because, wow, that'd be just so cool and such a great weekend to do it. And again, being the only game in town would be cool, but I don't know what anybody else thinks about that. Like I said, if we're thinking outside the box, let's cover all the bases and see what we can do.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about the freedom of the RFP is I could put 10 dates out there and say, hey, give us a quote for these 10 dates.
Yeah.
And see. So, but again, you know, if anybody's watching or listening, this isn't set in stone until we actually come back with a vote. So I'll gladly put a couple dates on there and see, and we'll get. Yeah,
and and we had mentioned a while back too about maybe even a drone show. Maybe we look at getting more environmental friendly and going to something like that.
Yeah, we did hear the laser side of things. They were saying that it was 5 to 6 times the cost.
Oh,
just
really?
Because it is definitely more environmental friendly. It's just there's not many companies doing it quite yet.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody's trying to get that one company. So there's a lot of demand for them, which is fantastic. I'm sure it'll grow, and then it'll be the way to go back then. And the drone thing, St. Pete, I can get those numbers, but I'm not hearing very cheap either. But again, we can
maybe if we do what Commissioner Andrews mentioned and go to like Memorial Day and just shift the date, maybe that might be at least an alternative worth considering, see what the costs are on it.
Well, I'll add Memorial Day to our fact finding for that. So,
I love that idea. Make Madeira Beach different, which we are anyway. Draw a bunch of people to the beaches. Maybe it won't rain 5 times that day.
Yeah, well,
I mean, there's a lot of pluses.
And it's true, the 4th of July, I mean, you go up on the top of the Cambria, you can see fireworks all around us, not necessarily in Madeira Beach, but Treasure Island has a big display. St. Pete Beach does. St. Pete does. So.
Yeah, go.
Okay.
Awesome. The only thing I don't like is after 4th of July.
I'm with you there too. That was I put the closest Saturday just for alternative options. But.
I understand. So, yeah.
Well, and that Friday night, 4th of July the 3rd of July on a Friday night. I'm reading that wrong. 2024 would be 4th of July would be a Thursday. So anyway. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mm-hmm. I got an idea too. If I can share it. I think that's the month we're doing our 75th anniversary is in May. Maybe we can have something huge and big and include the fireworks around that time.
Oh.
That's a great idea.
And May 7th is that date.
Month full of fun with Memorial, 4th of July, and all that.
Okay.
Every 25 years.
I won't be here for the next one, that's for sure.
So should we ask Jay to, I don't know what day May 7th lands on, but
You got it, Doug?
let's do it
Okay, I'll just,
the Saturday before May 7th.
Hey, me again. The King of the Beach is that weekend. So,
Memorial Day weekend?
it
No,
is,
that's-
it is the,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Well, that's something we need to we may need to shift it anyhow if they've got the King of the Beach tournament.
Well, we've had some preliminary discussions on, you guys have all attended. They're looking at Friday night, wondering how to amp it up. So that may be an opportunity, 75th, maybe we get together with them and,
Yeah.
so, we'll see.
Oh, that'd be terrific.
I mean, that'll get people here, for sure. We could put fireworks out there tonight on 10-minute notice and people would show up, so. All right, well, I'll talk to her.
Okay, thank you. Is that it? Any public comment on this? Next is Pinellas County Vulnerability Assessment. Director Portell.
Mayor, we have
Good
Kathy
evening.
Foster from Pinellas County.
Hi, I'm not Linda Portell. I'm Lisa Foster. I'm the Pinellas County Floodplain Administrator.
Lisa.
Good evening. Thank you all for inviting me. Bob and Linda asked me to come and just sort of tell you where we are with the vulnerability assessment and talk a little bit about the map updates and what direction we're thinking the county might go and kind of what the timeline looks like.
Okay.
Nope, it's not working. They said it might not work. Okay, so the vulnerability assessment came out of the Restore Act funding, and it's still in progress. We're waiting for the final report and some of the analysis part of it, but we've gotten the data collection and the actual vulnerability assessment data back from the consultants already. So we've got, sea level rise and storm surge analyses, and then we're taking that data and looking at our current assets and elevations and things and trying to assess what assets are at risk and what the risk is. Next. This is just an example of the sea level rise trends. This is a low, an intermediate, and a high. And these are the three scales that were used. Next. Sorry, I didn't know those were phased. Like I said, we were looking at the three different sea level rise scenarios, and then we looked at several different time horizons. So we started with current conditions, obviously, and then we built upon that. So we looked at 2040, 2070, and 2100 for the sea level rise, and then we built upon that by adding the storm surge analysis. So we started with the current conditions storm surge analysis. We did different frequency storms, 25-year, 100-year, 500-year, and we took those current conditions and incorporated those sea level rise scenarios for those different time horizons. Next. So we looked at several different sea level rise scenarios as well. 1 hour per year would be like a king tide, and then we went down to just, a mean high tide. So there are several different scenarios for the sea level rise based on the intermediate, the high, and the low scenarios. So there's a lot of data that we're still sifting through. Next. So this is just a screenshot of Indian Rocks Beach, and this is the high sea level rise scenario, just showing what the inundation is. So this would just, be a king tide in 2100. We're going to see a lot of streets inundated. This is going to be a common barrier island situation that we see. So we'll be looking at the assets, the outfalls. Will a backflow valve be sufficient, or will that create worse flooding with rainfall and things like that? Next. You all remember Tropical Storm Eta, which was just last fall. We had a few feet of storm surge. We saw a lot of flooding from that storm, and that was a very small storm. When you look at the scale of, we model everything for this 100-year storm or this 1% annual chance storm. So this was rainfall-wise less than a 10-year event, and storm surge-wise less than a 25-year event. And when we look at that 2040 high sea level rise scenario, those areas that we saw flooding during Tropical Storm Eta align pretty well with the areas that we see becoming inundated with that high scenario in 2040 or an intermediate scenario in 2070. 30-year mortgages, of course, brings you up to 2050 from 2020. And if you build a house today, you want it to be there in 50 years, so then you would be looking at your 2070 scenarios if you're looking at elevation, how high you want to build. And just some more pictures of what Tropical Storm Eta looked like, which is fresh in all our memories. Okay, so now we have the data. We need to take a look at the vulnerability of all the assets, and we have public and private assets. And the intent of this study, of course, was for infrastructure for publicly owned assets so that we can plan accordingly moving forward. And that's why we looked at those future time horizons with different sea level rise scenarios. But once we got the data and started sifting through it, we were thinking, well, people are building houses, so they have assets as well. So we should be taking a look at, how we build and construct things as well as, bridges and other infrastructure. Some adaptation strategies that we might talk about would be the check valves that I mentioned, elevating a little bit higher when you're building buildings, seawall heights, what's appropriate, and that's a conversation unto its own. You want to come up because of sea level rise, but you can't go too far because then you'll deflect the wave action and cause adverse impact to adjacent properties and things like that. So that's a whole separate animal. And then retreat, of course, and that is also a whole separate animal to talk about when we talk about densities and land use and things like that. And we're doing a lot of studies in addition to the vulnerability assessment. So hopefully this data, along with our flood mitigation action plan and phase 2 of this, when we get this wrapped up and are able to kick off another phase of this, and it's the SRAP, it's sustainability and resiliency plan that the county's working on. So all those kind of pieces pulled together should give us better guidance as where we want to go moving forward. So I'm going to come back to this. This was the data to the current conditions, 2018, and talk a little bit about that and how it compares to the FEMA data that we got. Next. So we took that current 100-year coastal floodplain, which is basically your current conditions storm surge floodplain, and compared it to the firm map, the flood insurance rate map that just expired. We just got new maps on August 24th. So this comparison is from the previous one that we've been using since 2003. And we can see across the county it's about a foot higher. The vulnerability assessment is showing about a foot higher for that 100-year flood elevation. And I pulled data for you guys today, just this afternoon, if you can go to the next one. So this is Madeira Beach, and you can see that most of the difference between the vulnerability assessment data and the firm that just expired is 1 to 2 feet difference. So the vulnerability assessment is showing that the risk is about a foot or two higher for that 1% annual chance storm than the previous flood insurance rate map. Next. Now let's talk about that flood insurance rate map update. So FEMA kicked this off back in 2012. We got our preliminary maps in 2018. There were no changes to Madeira Beach. So basically the data has been what it is since 2018 when we received it. And it went effective just this August, on August 24th. And next slide. And what we see when we compare that map that just expired that I had compared the vulnerability assessment to on the previous slide, we see that the entire west side of the county is decreasing and the bay side is increasing in those flood elevations. We also see areas coming out of that high-risk 100-year floodplain on the west side and areas going into it on the bay side. So the only difference is up in Boca Ciega Bay, up by the Reddingtons, you can see that the water kind of piles up there. You get that back bay effect. The same thing's happening in upper Tampa Bay. So you see increases in those areas. Next. So this is just a breakout by jurisdiction. I put a green circle around you guys so that you can see most of your jurisdiction has changed. About 70% is dropping in base flood elevation on the map that just went into effect compared to the old FEMA map. And about 15% has increasing base flood elevations. So your new maps, that's kind of what you're seeing on your new maps. Decreases across most of the city. Next. These are just the actual elevation differences. Majority of the area going down is about a 1 foot decrease, and the majority of the area going up is about a 1 foot increase. Until you get to the outside of the beach areas, that whole Gulf side, you're seeing much bigger drops, 3 feet, 4 feet. And then when you get in upper Tampa Bay, we're seeing increases of about 3 feet. And then that's that Back Bay effect. And we have a little bit of increase in upper Boca Ciega Bay as well. And this is, if you take out the areas that are not changing, the other one that had the small bars because it was showing that most of the county's not changing. This just zooms in on the areas that are changing, but you see the spread of the differences. The yellow line, those are the areas that are going down. So everything from yellow to red is going down, and then your light blue is not changing, and then your greens are going up. And next slide. So this is the snapshot of Madeira Beach. You can see that the majority of the city is dropping by 1 foot, and then you got some areas that are dropping by 2 or 3 feet. And on the intercoastal side, you can see that you've got some areas that are going up a foot or 2. And that was from that breakdown that I showed you before, where 70% is dropping and 15% is increasing. So this is just sort of the spread of exactly how is it changing. That's the difference in the base flood elevations. The light blue areas are not changing. And next slide. This is a comparison of the two studies, the vulnerability assessment 100-year floodplain versus the FEMA 100-year floodplain that is on the new map. That was just a coastal update that FEMA did, by the way. So they both used over 300 storms for their storm ensemble for the probability modeling, but 2 different probability models were used. The vulnerability assessment used NASHM, which is a NASA model. It was done by a NASA climatologist. I'm not sure exactly which model was used by FEMA. The data that was input into those models for FEMA was up through 2012, up through 2018 for the vulnerability assessment. 2 different coupled models were used. It's just 2 different modeling methodologies were used. And the LIDAR data used to map the results from those models, 2007 for FEMA and 2017 for the county study. These were all the storms that occurred between 2012 and 2018 that were not included in the FEMA probability analysis. This is a quick 101 of the flood insurance rate map. The flood insurance rate map is used for 3 things. It is used to determine who is required to have flood insurance with a federally backed mortgage. It's used to determine what flood insurance rates are, and it is used for minimum floodplain development regulations. So when we talk about flood insurance rates, that is completely changing. The 2 things that will remain with this new FEMA map that you got are flood insurance requirements will still be based on the map, whether or not you're in or out of that blue area, which is considered the high-risk area, special flood hazard area, and the minimum floodplain development requirements, and that's a national standard based on this particular map. And then your floodplain ordinance will reflect your higher standards that reflect the needs of the city. Next. So I mentioned that the insurance is changing. There should be a slide of the insurance here. So this is the new pricing methodology, kind of a snapshot of it, of what FEMA is looking at. They're going to be looking at foundation type, elevation of that lowest floor, distance to the water, whether or not you're on a barrier island. And these factors are all weighing very heavily on the premiums I'm seeing coming out of this program. And right now, if you have a current policy in place, you'll be put on a glide path. It'll be for a residential structure 18% per year until you reach this new premium. If somebody's just coming into the program, though, they'll just have to decide whether they want to go with the private or one of the new rates based on the new rating methodology. This is just a recap of the changes. So they've given a new map that went into effect August 24th. We're seeing lower base flood elevations, which would allow for development to be built lower. A lot of the B zones are changing into coastal A zones, which are less restrictive. And then on the flip side of that, the insurance side of FEMA is coming out with this new rating methodology that's looking at elevations and foundation types and things like that to come up with the premiums. So a little bit counterintuitive. So we put together a few options. We've got this vulnerability assessment data. It's showing the risk is actually a little bit higher. We've got this new FEMA map. It's showing the risk is lower. And then we've got this new FEMA insurance rating methodology, which on the barrier islands is showing some significant increases in premiums. So we kind of put three things out here. We do nothing, and we'll be building less resiliency and likely driving insurance rates up. There's no verification because we haven't received enough data to be able to do a full analysis of what the impact is going to be yet. We could hold the line, and we looked at it. It's 1 foot higher on average for the vulnerability assessment, which equates to what we've been doing since 2003. The FEMA map plus a foot of freeboard as the minimum standard for the state. So that would be hold the line. You either go with the new map plus freeboard or the vulnerability assessment with no freeboard, and that would kind of hold the line. And then the third thing we put on here is we could actually use the vulnerability assessment data. We have this huge data set. It's a brand new data set. So we can incorporate that into our floodplain ordinances, treat it as best available data. You look at the flood elevations, you go with the higher of the two, and then you apply your freeboard to that. Alternatively, you could look at those future conditions. Intermediate sea level rise 2070 condition, for example. That gets you 50 years out. What's the elevation then? Or we could look at a bigger storm. We did the 500-year storm too. So you could use the current situation for a larger storm event. And for Madeira Beach, I believe it was the 100-year storm event equated to an approximate Cat 2 from the slosh model, the evacuation zone models that you're used to seeing. So I believe that the 100-year floodplain is about a Cat 2. So if you just go in with a vulnerability assessment, it gets you up to about a Cat 2. The 500-year was over a Cat 3. Next. We did reach out to a lot of stakeholders, and the results that came back from that, the majority said, let's go with the higher of the two plus the freeboard. Next. This is just a picture of a profile showing what the coastal A zone is. The B zone is where we would expect greater than 3 feet of wave action with a 100-year storm event. And some of those B zones have turned into coastal A zones, and then some of our regular A zones have turned into coastal A zones on the intercoastal side. We never had this LIMWA line. It's a limit of moderate wave action. So it always went from, okay, there's 3 or more feet of wave action, and then there's no wave action. I mean, we know there's wave action, but it's not mapped, and there's no requirement for a particular foundation that goes along with being resistant to wave action, scour erosion, and things like that. So now we have this area called the coastal A zone. So the question is, what do we do with the coastal A zone? We've never had it before. We've had B zone with B zone regs. The Florida Building Code addresses it. It basically treats it like a B zone. The exception being backfilled stem walls are permitted with engineering analysis that they won't be impacted by scour and erosion. And for commercial structures, they'll still have an opportunity to engineer floodproofing. Next slide. You have about 30% of the city is a coastal A zone. Some of that used to be a B zone, so it'll be dropping in regulatory requirements, and then some of it is new because it's on the intercoastal where we didn't have the wave analysis done before. So you've got some new coastal A zones as well. So you're talking about 30% when you start talking about foundations and how you want to treat your coastal A zone. So we went back to that. We can do nothing, let the Florida Building Code take care of it. FEMA recommends that you treat these coastal A zones like B zones, but the NFIP doesn't specify that you have to do that. So the FEMA recommendation is that you treat it like a B zone, but that would be done at the local level for your own ordinances. And then we could do a modified version of the FEMA recommendation and do only residential as a coastal A zone, make all those homes get up. And most of them will anyhow. The coastal A zone average depth is 4 feet. Once you put your freeboard on top of that, it's a waste of space not to just go a little bit higher and put a garage underneath. So most people will elevate anyhow and not do a backfilled stem wall. So we could do it for just residential, not commercial. That would allow the commercial to at least try to engineer that floodproofing. And then the other choice would be B zone regulations in coastal A zones and all zones, basically, in the entire jurisdiction if you're on a barrier island, assuming there's going to be wave action with a major storm event everywhere on the island. It's not going to be limited to where the LIMWA is. Survey says go with B zone regs in coastal A zone. And next. And that's it. So that's just, it's a lot of information. So we've got the vulnerability assessment that was recently done, then you got the new FEMA maps rolling out, and then you've got your floodplain ordinance to talk about. But you have Linda, and she's a fantastic floodplain manager, and she'll help guide you through this.
Okay. Ms. Foster, one quick question. Did they have a rate structure for the higher freeboard? Have you seen that? They don't
it does not exist, and I don't even know that they would be able to do it the way that the new rating methodology is. There are so many variables that everybody's calling it the black box. So the rating table system is, I've been talking to agents and writers to write your own companies, and it used to be that they could at least see what was causing a rate to be high or low or whatever. And they can't even troubleshoot at this point because all they have is the sheet where they do the input and then it spits out the premium.
It's the old vote on it first and then you'll find out what it is. Yeah, because I was talking to one of the other mayors and he said his rates are going from $2,500 a year to $9,000 a year. So, okay.
Well, the CRS credit will help with that. I believe those rates that are coming out on the new system include the discount, though. So if, say, you're a Class 5, you're getting a 25% discount. So that should be incorporated into there. So just know that it could be worse if you didn't have a CRS program. And also, if you have a policy in place, you'll be put on that glide path. And there's a lot of talk about refining it. So hopefully we can reach out to FEMA and work on things.
Okay. Any other questions?
Is it possible to get a copy of this that's so fast and so many new terms that sometimes the elevation sounded like it was a good thing and other times it sounded like it was a bad thing? And I couldn't keep up with that.
You're welcome to have the presentation, and Linda has the data as well, so she can go through. I've got pivot tables in a workbook, and she can kind of plug in whatever she needs to, or call me if you can't figure out my spreadsheet, and let me know. I can pull the data together for you.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Lisa, thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you.
Director Portell, have you got anything for us on this? We're going to be leaning on you mighty hard, I guarantee you. What's new, huh? Thanks very much. Is there any public comment on this? Okay, next is the comprehensive plan, coastal element, Director Portell and Mr. Murphy. We need a couple of high-top stools up there.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Murphy, as he's been guiding us through this process. Some of the work he's been doing on other grant work has resulted in a list of amendments to the coastal element. Of course, we're updating the entire comp plan anyway. So we've actually gotten a good way through that with the changes that we had to make with the impact fees and also the peril of flood and vulnerability studies that they were doing in other projects. So I've asked him to come in, just give you a broad presentation on those changes to the coastal element. All of this, of course, will be coming back to you when we're ready to make the full amendment to the comp plan. It'll go through the LPA. They'll make a recommendation, and then it'll come back to you for 2 readings. But I wanted you to hear generally what's going on in case you have some guidance or additional things that you want added in.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. For the record, Jerry Murphy, University of Florida. I'm just going to go briefly over what we've done to the comprehensive plan. As Linda indicated, this is part of your evaluation and appraisal. You'll be doing the entire comprehensive plan over the next year or so. But because we got a grant from the state to implement the peril of flood legislation, we went ahead and basically did the coastal element at this point because it just made sense. We have done some modified changes like we did with the level of service standards, just to clean up the language in the comprehensive plan to make it as accessible as possible to the public. Can't always do that and keep it legal, but we've tried to do that as much as possible. For example, where the current plan indicates residents, we've changed that to citizens and visitors because you don't have just residents, you have businesses, you have tourists, and so that's all of what you're planning for. The goals, objectives, and policies have broad, comprehensive applications, businesses and tourists, so that just made sense. Like I said, we've been cleaning up the language, and we started that, as Linda mentioned, with the proportionate shared development fees, the things that we needed to do in the comprehensive plan to underpin that, make that legitimate. Then we took all of the coastal management and conservation goals, objectives, and policies and aligned them under two goals. Goal 8 is now coastal management, and Goal 9 addresses conservation. And under the entire element, we put in a new purpose statement, so that language at the very beginning is new. And then we tried to track the statutory language in the way that it's organized. In the old days, which is where your current plan comes from, there was a rule called 9J5, and it laid out what needed to be done in great detail. In 2011, the legislature repealed that, replaced it with the Community Planning Act, which was much more expansive. The rule was eliminated, so the guidance now comes from the statute. So we followed the statute. And the reason we did that is because in 2015, the state adopted peril of flood. Last year, they adopted a new program that requires vulnerability assessments statewide and a state vulnerability plan. And it lays out criteria for what a vulnerability assessment is supposed to include. This kind of is running parallel with the work that the county has been doing that Lisa presented. So we've got that language following the statute now under those two goals. And we had to address peril of flood, which is basically saying your comprehensive plan has to include strategies, objectives, goals for dealing with climate change and sea level rise. And we've included that. And those are basically in new policies 8.6.7, 8.6.8, and 8.6.17. For the most part, the element as it's drafted is the major part of your packet tonight. And a lot of that at the end is being stricken through because we rearranged it. And so the best way to do that is just eliminate where it is language that was old, and now the new language comes out. We didn't eliminate anything unless it was irrelevant, which was very few. And finally, revised policy 8.8.2 and revised policy 8.8.3 have been revised to address those peril of flood requirements. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about this. And then if I may, I'd like to reserve a couple minutes to follow up on some of the things that Lisa told you and how they might affect Madeira Beach particularly.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
A lot easier to read, and I appreciate you shortening it and following the statute. Can't go wrong.
Yeah, there's a couple places where policies repeated or basically we're addressing the same thing, and we just combined them because it made sense.
Yep.
So in terms of the vulnerability assessment that the county's doing and the new firm maps, flood insurance rate maps, always keep in mind here on a barrier island, when FEMA does flood insurance rate maps, they're looking at historical data. They're not, Lisa mentioned the hurricanes that weren't included in their analysis. So even the historical data is kind of historical. And the planning that is being promoted at the national level to FEMA is to start looking at these inundation modelings of future sea level rise so that we can plan that way, not build based on historical data for future problems that are going to be more severe. So you need to, I think, keep that in mind. As also part of this grant, we performed a vulnerability assessment specific to Madeira Beach. It's a little more granular than what Lisa was showing you countywide, and we've submitted a grant for this cycle to update that because last year the legislature passed Florida Statute now 380.093, which outlines the modeling curves 2040, 2070 that you have to look at in terms of doing these vulnerability assessments, and it also identifies a long list, a very detailed list, it seems to me, of what they call critical assets. And these are assets that would be vulnerable in a sea level rise scenario, and so you're supposed to identify those and identify strategies for protecting them, removing them, elevating them, just whatever seems appropriate. So we're anticipating that that grant will be approved, and we will revise your specific citywide vulnerability assessment to incorporate those statutory criteria. So you'll have a statutorily compliant vulnerability assessment. And from there, I think you can make much better citywide decisions in terms of what you need to focus on looking in the future. So at that point, historical data, future problems, that there's a disconnect there that has not been resolved at the federal level yet. Hopefully it will be someday.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm happy to take any questions about that as well.
well, that sounds like go with the higher free board.
I would suggest that. I would suggest that given the narrowness of the island, not just this way, but all the way around, all the coastal properties are particularly vulnerable, and, a storm can come from any direction and dump all sorts of problematic water. So if you look at the entire island as a velocity zone, then you've got basically one regulation for everybody. I agree with Lisa's comment in that you may want to have separate regulations for commercial. Commercial has the opportunity to engineer themselves in a much different way. They are generally evacuated where residents aren't always, and so the vulnerability is that much less for life and property. And if there are no more questions, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Director Portell, did you want to expand on that?
Just something small. We've been going through updated CRS training this last week, and one of the things that Jerry said about projecting forward is going to be affecting people long-term, because we now not only have to look at that historic data and what have the storms done in the past and how did they establish the flood rates, but they're going to be expecting us to also develop policies that address how we respond to sea level rise between now and 2050, and showing how we either harden buildings or where the new lines will be, or not allowing people to move beyond a line towards that so that they're not building towards the coming sea levels, and especially to really analyze the effects on the beach areas. So their expectations when they're setting our rates are going to start involving not just that historic data, but the forward-looking approach. So you're correct about the freeboard. We just raised ours to 4 feet. You just voted on that. So that was our response to making sure that we're doing what we can, at least up front, to make sure everybody's safe and we're minimizing damage as much as possible. That was our first directive. That's all.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this? Next is local mitigation study strategy. Director Portell, I see that's why we need that stool up there.
Yes, and I think I'm just going to do it from here since all the systems aren't working and the gadget's not working as well. So I'll need to look at the slides behind me. This is a presentation that may seem familiar to you, at least in some extent, because every year the local governments are required to come to you and make a presentation on the local mitigation strategy, the cooperative effort that we're involved with all of the communities within Pinellas County to make sure that we have a plan on how we deal with hazard mitigation, how we prepare ahead of time, and how we respond afterwards to minimize recovery time. And this is very important to us because if you are hoping to get any state or federal grants for any kind of facility improvement or expansion, the project that you're looking for needs to be improved or included in the LMS, the local mitigation strategy. And so we're in that process right now of I'm looking over our list, see what kind of projects we have on there, looking forward to projects we've talked about. For instance, we talked about a garage that might be a mobility hub. There are other ways that we can use that to include it into the local mitigation strategy if we hope to get any kind of federal or state funding to assist with it. So it's very important for us to keep up with that and keep our participation up high. In order for us to get credits for our participation in the LMS, we need to be participants. So there are at least 2 staff members that attend every meeting, and there's a certain portion of those activities during which we must have with us local stakeholders in the same number that we have staff members. So we've had the pleasure of working with Vince from the library, who's been really diligent about attending all these meetings for 2 years now, and Chuck Dillon, who's come as a citizen construction representative. So we really appreciate their participation in these. These are long meetings. I'll get into this. So this is the requirement for the local mitigation strategy comes from the Stafford Act, which was adopted in 2000. It requires the county to have a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan, and the purpose of that is to reduce death, injury, and property loss. There are various methods in preparing this. First of all, they need to identify all the likely disaster scenarios based on history. Then they have to, among themselves, agree to a shared strategy in addressing all of these and hopefully making improvements to avoid the full impact of that disaster should it come. And then plan for after the event mitigation to make sure we streamline the effect, everybody cooperates as best they can with the various resources, and that we fund things in an order that's already been considered ahead of time. So the advantages to the local government to participating are many. It supports the support in reducing our risk for the countywide projects, obviously. Participation in the educational program is really important. There's a very strong public participation and education piece to the LMS. And so all of the things that we do throughout the year for the CRS, like the annual letter you get from my office explaining flood hazards, the brochures we send out, all the flyers, even management of the electronic sign up here and its messages, participation in countywide events that are educational and training events and things, all of that is part of what we get credit for in our participation in the LMS. And those are also credits we get for the CRS. So that's a really important piece of what's done here. Then also eligibility for participating jurisdictions, as I said, for grants and other funding opportunities. If it's not in the LMS, you're not going to get considered. So making sure that we maintain our eligibility and participation. There are the participation credits for the community rating system. And as you know, we're always fighting to make sure we're getting as many points for that as we can to hopefully control at least a little bit what's happening with people's insurance. And then compliance with state and federal hazard mitigation requirements. It's part of a team effort. We get a lot of credit for the good work that the county does in this regard too. So the process is that they create a representative organization. So each participating local government sends representatives. In our case, we have several listed, including the public works director, the fire chief, myself, and Jenny as our other CFM, and at least 2 of us at a time attend those meetings and make sure that we have enough stakeholders with us to have an even match. Then they involve the public by having everybody required to bring those stakeholders in. They coordinate the planning and input throughout the county. We come back to you with reports. We get your input on things. We take it back to the LMS committees, and they include all of that data gathering in their decision-making process. And then we assess the hazards with the vulnerability assessment throughout the county, figure out which things are the greatest weaknesses, which need to be addressed or can be addressed up front, how, an order in which things would be funded. And then they use the assessment to quantify and locate all of those impacts of hazard to figure out where, as I said, the weaknesses are. They set goals and objectives for step-by-step how we're going to address those. They mitigate the threat by addressing the weaknesses up front, if at all possible, and also set a plan and a ranking system for addressing hazards, mitigation and activities as they come. This requires a lot of maintenance. It never seems to be done. I'm sure Lisa thinks the same thing. The original was adopted in 1998. The updates in 2004, 2009, 2015, and 2020 were completed. The 2020 process took us 18 months. It was a lot of meetings and a lot of participation. It was a really noble effort because it's an extremely large package. And then we also have an annual update. Now, the reason I'm coming to you now is to let you know this is the point at which we begin the annual update, and we submit the list of all of our capital improvements and facilities and projects, all of our individual public relations and education items, and then go through the process of ranking those, assigning them points, telling where they're paid for and how much each is going to cost. It's an extensive spreadsheet on the two different activities, the projects and communications, that we have to update every year. So the communication elements that we get involved with here are our social media posts, our newspaper ads, the city municipal sign, city procedures, produced brochures. Some of the information for that brochure, a large part of it, starts with the county. They have all kinds of resources that the county's developed that we can download and personalize to each city, and we take advantage of those. We send those out in your annual letter and also post them around town. We have them outside City Hall, the library, and down at the kiosk. We have public information collection at the library that has a detailed flood information and resources available. We do an annual citywide hazard preparation letter, which I'm sure you've seen every year, and an annual repetitive loss letter identifying, letting people know that they're in an area that receives repetitive loss claims. The facility projects include things like our roadway replacement and resurfacing, underground utilities, stormwater improvements, public building improvements and hardening, mobility and parking improvements, additions of emergency management facilities, anything like that that we're contemplating, we would keep in the list. So that's what we're largely undertaking now, is the update of that plan. We can distribute it to you, since you probably won't need another presentation, but when we get our list put together, we'll distribute it to you for part of your information, and also keep including updates on that in things like the manager's report, so you know what's going on.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Is there any public comment on this? Okay, next is item E, discussion on possible sale of city property at 13222 3rd Street East, Madeira Beach. Mr. Trask.
I appreciate the fact that this has been added to the agenda so we can get some direction. As you know, the city has been involved in some litigation. The start of litigation was the filing of a complaint to foreclose a special magistrate lien on the property. The defendant in the case is Overture Realty, LLC. The property was recently sold at the judicial sale. This is the sale that used to take place in the county court steps. Now it's done electronically. The sale took place on September 15th, and the city of Madeira Beach became the owner of the property as of that date. The city, as you know, had a credit for the total dollar amount of the judgment, which was several $100,000. When you have that credit, that means basically you can bid up to that dollar amount without coming out of pocket a single penny to get the property. So on the Real Foreclosed website, we bid the judgment amount. It was bid up to $125,100. In other words, there were other people bidding on the home or the lot, Those bids stopped at $125,100. I'm telling you that because of the fact that when we pay the documentary stamps on the purchase of the property, we only have to pay them at the $125,000 mark versus the $400,000 mark if that's the judgment amount. So that's beneficial to the city. As of today's date, that we haven't received the certificate of title. That'll come approximately 10 days after the sale. And then once we get title to the property, we still have to deal with the appeal. The property owner did appeal the final judgment of foreclosure. He filed a notice of appeal almost immediately after the judgment was entered. Since the appeal was filed, there has been no appellate brief filed. All of the fees subject for that they are subject to pay for the record in the case have not been paid for. The deadline will expire in about 10 days. We'll know at that time whether or not they actually are going to follow through with the appeal or not. One of the things that I think that would be beneficial to make the appeal go away if they do it would be to maybe waive the deficiency on the property so that, you know, basically what it is it's a dollar amount that the city is entitled to up and above the fair market value of the property. So, for example, if we have a judgment of $400,000 and the property is worth $200,000, there's a possible deficiency judgment of $200,000, the difference between the two. So, what I would suggest is to allow me to negotiate that to make the appeal go away so that we will not pursue the deficiency. We would literally have to pursue the deficiency against a company in Lexington, Kentucky. I really don't see that we're going to be, doing that on the cheap. We'd have to hire a lawyer in Kentucky, and we'd have to domesticate the judgment. And so I think that you'll probably be getting a good return on your money. You may not get your total judgment dollar amount, but you now will have the property. And I want to give you some value so that you know. I pulled off the Pinellas County Property Appraiser's website today that the just market value of the property is $236,000. The sales comparison value listed by the property appraiser is $277,300. So if the property was put up for sale, you probably would want to list it in the $275,000 range and come down from there if necessary. But before we get to that point of selling the property, you need to know that pursuant to your charter, once you own the property, you have to hold a referendum to sell it. And I'm just going to, direct your attention to section 1.7 of your charter. It says, only after a favorable referendum vote by a majority of the electors' votes cast may such a property interest be sold, leased, or conveyed. So we'll have to go through that process once you give me the direction what you want to do one way or the other. You don't really have to do anything right now. Yeah. You can sit on it. If you want to sit on it for a couple of years, you can do that. We just have to maintain it, cut the grass, and we have to insure it so that we make sure that nobody gets hurt on it. And so there are some carrying costs, but you may want to do that as well. So those are kind of the things that I wanted to bring forward. First of all, do I have your authority to negotiate a deal where get them to dismiss the appeal with no deficiency being sought?
Now, you said that would have to take place in Kentucky. I would think they would have to take care of it down here.
So
rather than
if they don't have any property in Florida or in Pinellas County other than this one lot, we have to look for assets where they're located. So they may have assets in Lexington, Kentucky. Okay. And so we would have to domesticate the judgment.
You're talking about to
get the properties up in Kentucky.
Of the value. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, before we did anything, we would, do a little bit of research and see whether or not that they own any other properties here in Pinellas County or Florida. We can do that. The cost is minimal. I can do a search for that. It'll be about $20, So I would do that, obviously, before we move forward with that. But it's just a suggestion. We can avoid the appeal. We can avoid any attorney's fees and court costs and any uncertainty that may come out of the appeal. So,
Is there a structure still on that property?
No.
Has it been, it's been knocked down?
Right.
Okay.
yeah, I haven't been by the property, but I know that,
Yeah.
Vice Mayor has been by and she has mentioned that it's been
Yeah,
cleared.
last time I went by there, there was still a structure on there, so.
And lots are going for more than 275,000
Well,
in that neighborhood. I mean,
that's why I wanted to put it on here. To me, the city doesn't need to own another vacant lot for people to walk their dogs, and we have to maintain and insure and everything. It's not like it's on the water or
not a
anything.
pocket park or anything. It's just
No.
between some homes.
Right,
you know,
and so if we sell the property, then a home is built there, then we get ad valorem taxes from the home too. I think it's a win-win for the city if we sell it, if we can, get it on the ballot to try to get it passed to sell. But I would, for me, I'm fine with you proceeding with what you need to do on there to
Okay.
settle the.
All right, so the next step then, if the appeal goes away and once the title, we receive the certificate of title, in some cities that I represent, they would hire an appraiser and have it appraised. It may cost you $500 to do that, and then you would know what the fair market value of it is, and then you could set your price based upon that. The numbers I gave you were very, very simple, just coming off of the website.
Yeah.
So, and obviously, if the vice mayor is aware of the fact that the lots are selling for much more than that, you probably want to get the appraisal for two reasons. One, to set the purchase price, and one, to be able to answer to your constituents that you didn't sell it for less than what it was worth.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that something we should wait on till we know whether or not we can sell the property?
Yes. I would not suggest that we spend any money, but once we get the title and we know that the appeal has been dismissed, then I would ask for your authority to do the appraisal and then come back to you with that. And then you would tell me what the purchase price would be, and then we would have to, more than likely, hire a real estate company to list it, and have them market it. And then once they get a contract, the contract would basically say, we're selling it at this price, and here are the contingencies. Board of Commissioners approval, referendum approval, and so on. Whatever other contingencies that we'd need, that would be in the contract after that.
Okay. I was wondering if that was something we needed to wait to do until after we had a referendum on it. But
I'd like the referendum to read that we have a purchaser who wants to pay this amount of money.
okay.
Do you as a resident agree to sell the property to this person for this dollar amount? Here's the appraisal. Yeah. We'll
I
have
don't
the appraisal.
understand. I would think we would want to get a referendum this March that says to our citizens, city now owns this property, we're going to sell it at the highest amount we can get for it. And get that out of the way, because who's going to want to buy a lot? They can't touch it until everyone in the city votes on it. I mean, they can't build on it until a referendum, and that doesn't happen until March. I mean, I don't know. It seems like we should get that knocked out of the way, if that's our intent, and if that's what the people want.
Yeah, that's whatever direction you want to
Right
give
now,
me.
it's hot. I mean, people are paying more for listing prices, and I say we jump on that before something happens.
Well, and the other alternative is we keep it to let people walk their dogs on it.
No, we don't want to do that.
Does the referendum have to be in March, or can it be in November?
You'd want to do it on whatever day the supervisor of elections is already holding another election, so that we don't have the additional costs for a special election. So,
So either one, basically, because we have one every March. We know that.
My advice to you would be do it in March. If we do it in March, we have some deadlines that are coming up very quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
We would have to have the ballot language no later than the end of December, and for the November election, I think it's early August.
I would say we go ahead and get the appraisal and just let you.
No, I'd say we sell it. I mean, I think our citizens will agree to sell the lot without all this detail. You know, we could simply that the city became in possession of an empty lot, or we now own an empty lot. We want to sell it. and yes or no. I mean,
We still have to have a value of the lot, is that correct? To even put it on the ballot?
No, you don't have to have the value.
Okay.
That was my suggestion, is so the public would know you're selling this lot and you're going to get $275,000 for example. If you want to just go to have the referendum saying you have this lot, you'd like to sell it, and you'll sell it at the fair market value, then you can go that direction. But you're just going to need to have the appraisal to reflect what the fair market value is then.
Okay. So we can wait on that.
You can wait on the appraisal,
Right.
but we can move forward with the referendum.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, we may want to, I don't know if there's any other little parcels we want to, because we could explain to people now, hey, these are things we don't want to insure them anymore. We can put money in our coffers. We can keep your taxes low. We can put it towards the parking garage. I mean, we could explain it and people will okay it, and we can clean up. I don't know if we own little things. I think we do. I think we own little corners and things everywhere.
I think 11 of them, but I don't want to muddy the water with us putting a bunch of property out there for sale.
Well, if we have another lot or another similar type property, maybe we do it at the same time. But if we don't, I mean, now's the time, and I think everybody sitting here knows now's the time.
Sure.
You know.
Well, we can take a look at it. Maybe we can get if we can get a list of the properties we've got. We got that at one time, but I'm sure mine's in file 13 by now.
Mr. Mayor, we can redistribute that. There's two factors, though, you have to look at. A lot of the small parks, or we call them parks, but they're lots, they do have a lot of drainage and sewer and water pipes sometimes running through those because they basically are right-of-ways.
Right.
We're
or
not
easements.
talking about that.
No,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then Linda brought it up, although she stepped out, but Linda brought it up to me too, that part of our CRS rating is having so much green space that's available. And, so we don't want to, and I'm not trying to be negative. These are just two considerations that you have to look at if we look at other pieces of property to see what the cause and effect would be.
Yeah, and those and a number of those are on the water. So we've got seawalls to maintain, and I know some of them have outfalls going through them too. That
we can talk about the pocket parks later, but this is just in a neighborhood.
Right.
No water.
Right,
no,
and that's why.
We're not ever going to put
No.
we will never be putting a playground there or anything like that.
No, well, that's why I wanted to get it on the agenda for tonight.
Good.
Because I can't see, personally, I can't see keeping that lot. It's more expense for really no reason. If we can get $250,000 to $300,000 out of it, that's a win for the city. So.
And I don't think we would go after those people in Kentucky or anything anyway, so let's settle the appeal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the direction.
We will settle the appeal then, and we'll look at getting this on the ballot for sale in March.
Okay, you were talking about vacant or empty pocket park and stuff. Don't we also own a property in John's Pass? Is that something that we make lots of money and we want to keep, or is this the time to?
I think we do.
We make a tremendous amount of money on that. And this is a lot. It's not on the water or anything. Right. It's in a residential area. It's just basically was back taxes and fines and whatnot that built up. And
it's 4,000 square feet. I mean, it's not a non-conforming lot. So, we have a lot of those too. This would be a lot that could build a somewhat decent size.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else have anything?
Just breakfast with Bob in the morning, 8 o'clock. Okay. We're at the rec center.
Okay. Good. Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned at 7:15 p.m.